Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to model for you here the way that we can analyze a primary source. Um, and the document I chose is document 2.4 in Sources of the Modern Sources for Forging the Modern World, um, and pages 22 through 23. And the background questions, first part, are fairly easy to answer. And we first, we see the author is Luis de Velasco. He is from Spain. You can see this up here in the uh, uh, introduction. He's from Spain, born into a noble family, and served the Spanish crown. Okay, you get this from the introduction um, to the document, and then he becomes a viceroy in New Spain. Okay, the second one means that he's the representative of the Spanish crown there. Okay, so that's his position here. Um, He's identified with authority and with the crown from another place now in New Spain, which is modern day Mexico. 1550, he's sent there. The purpose in the audience, well, um, he produced the document writing to Emperor Charles V, King of Spain, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Emperor of the Spanish Empire. And so he wanted to tell him that things were not going very well here. Wasn't sure if he would be able to implement these new laws, which were um, meant to control the colonies for Spain. Okay, these territories, not to let the conquistadors and the Spaniards who were there kind of in control, the local authorities rule, but make sure that the Spanish crown exercised its rights and control over these territories. Um, and also, these new laws were tended to be fairly more friendly to the Indians, to the Native Americans there. Uh, the local people there were, the local Spaniards, the conquistadors and other Spaniards that had come over there or been born there, were often very eager to exploit the Indians, to force them into labor, um, to abuse them, to hurt them, to kill them. And so the crown also wanted to protect the Native Americans as their subjects, sometimes by um, means that would be very upsetting to the local Spaniards. Okay, and so um, Velasco wants to say to the crown, you know, we're getting a little too far ahead. People are not going to like it if we implement these laws. Okay, what kind of document is it? Well, it is a letter. Okay, um, it is a letter of the Viceroy of New Spain. Okay, it's a letter to the king or to the emperor. Now, the historical context, I've gotten into this a little bit here, but what kind of cultural values can we see? Well, Spaniards in this period, and as many still are today, but certainly in this period, are Catholic, and you can see that um, he's referring to the church here when he says he talks about our holy faith in the uh, second column of the first page. He says here about our holy faith. The natives are not so firm in our holy faith. Our holy faith represents the Catholic faith, something very important to Catholics. You can also see the hierarchy here. Where he talks about the country being so full of blacks and mestizos. Mestizos are those who are have one Indian parent and one Spanish parent, or who generally are a mix of Native American and Spanish. And he identifies them with violence, with potential unrest. Okay, talks about a bad breed here. Um, he he wants to get rid of some of the um, mestizos and blacks, but also the Spanish, to try to send them out on conquest because there's too many. Um, he talks about the Indians here having more laxity and ease, and their constancy will suffer. In other words, their um, Indians are weak and also um, not working hard enough. Okay, all those are part of it. He also talks about his desire to return to Spain on page 23. Let's let this load for a minute here. But on page 23, he begs the king to let him return to Spain. Okay, to die in Spain, he says. He's also concerned about the poverty, but he certainly loves Spain and believes that Spaniards themselves seem to be a better group of people than um, the mestizos and the blacks of the New World. So we get some of the historical values, cultural values there. Um, Also, again, I've already talked about the controversy of the new laws here, but this is a way that we see the historical context influencing that. It's not easy for the Spanish monarchy to control the colonies. We might think, oh, well, it was the 1500s, kings had all this power, but this was far away. Uh, they don't necessarily have all the power, even in their own kingdoms, to control everything, let alone across the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. Um, how about the content? Now we're dealing with um, the ways that we can try to understand what the document's trying to do. Reading with the grain, well, the information the author's trying to provide is talking about unrest. Mentioned already the difficulty of enforcing the laws. He talks about his poverty and says, "I really need to be able to go back and to Spain and hopefully get um, some money as well um, to get a sufficient salary." He says on page 23, so he's not ruined. Um, he um, talks also about the conditions there of the labor on page 23. Uh, the mines themselves, he says, are not going to um, work much longer without the Indians. So it's a dire situation, according to him. Okay. Now, that's all what he's trying to put in there, right? These are all things he's putting right up and center. There's lots of problems. There's disorder. There's even a dispute with the church he talks about at the top of page 22 and the top of the second column there. And he's personally in bad shape. All right, so that's with the grain. That's what he's trying to do. We can get a picture of the new world from that. But what about if we read against the grain? Is there anything unintentional for reading carefully? Well, um, against the grain, we can see that he's not saying specifically the church is, uh, you know, uh, a potential problem. But at the top of page 22, he talks about how um, the Indians probably should not be put with the friars. Okay, um, they haven't been fully converted enough to show that or to be trusted. Okay, um, he wants them to side with the settlers, the conquerors and settlers here, who oftentimes wanted Indian labor very badly and didn't like the idea of Indians going to live with the church, um, the friars. And so um, you can tell that there's this conflict there between the settlers and the church. Okay, that's one thing you can kind of read into it. Secondly, the dominance of what came to be called the peninsulares. In other words, the people from the peninsula, the Spanish, the people born in Spain. And Velasco is born in Spain and very much identifies with them. He wants to return to die in Spain, he says on page 23. He uh, talks about the blacks and mestizos being less trustworthy than the Spaniards. He even talks about how the Spaniards on page 23 don't even want to work in the mines, even if they would starve to death. Okay, and so you get this sense of hierarchy among the races there. That's also very well established in Latin America, the Latin American colonies under Spain. Okay, so those are some things you can read into it a bit. Now the question is, what about reliability? What's reliable here? Okay, do we actually believe what Velasco says, and what can we learn about it if we're trying to learn about Spanish society in the 1550s? Sorry, Latin American society in the 1550s. Well, I would be very skeptical of his depiction of mestizos, blacks, and Indians. He's very hostile to them, knowing that um, there's a certain sense of superiority that he seems to display over them. You have to be careful of just saying, "Oh yeah, this is what the non-Spaniards were like." That's generally not something we want to do, uh, because we're taking their a strong critic, someone who's insulting them, and saying, "Oh yeah, that's what they're like." We don't generally want to be known by others in the way that our enemies see us, and so that's something we'd want to be careful with. Um, but it does tell us that there were these beliefs about Spanish superiority over mestizos and blacks, okay, and Indians. One thing also that we can tell about reliability is that there are indeed tensions. This is just one uh, picture of those tensions, and we're more likely to have the picture of the governor, the description of the governor, than of a discontented Indian, say, or a poor mestizo view of the tension. But we get some picture of the tension, and if we can then think, all right, yeah, there are some tensions here in Latin America in the 1500s, and this gives us one view of it, and we can look for other kinds uh, of other views. And so uh, the reliability issue that I've just talked about helps us to understand what we can learn about the past and what other sources and perspectives. Well, it would be great if we got a bunch of documents from Indians, from Black people in Latin America, from the mestizos. Those are not as plentiful uh, as we would like. A lot of people couldn't write that were in lower ends of the social spectrum, but this can help us. We would also probably be interested in knowing, well, what did the king write back, if possible? What were the king and his officials in Spain thinking about this? How did they respond in general? Why did they want to try to protect the Indians? Um, why was it so hard to get, get the local colonists to obey the crown? And if we have protests, say, from the um, local colonists against the new laws, that would be helpful as well. Um, another set of sources that could be helpful would be from the friars, from the various um, church officials who often saw themselves as trying to protect the Indians against the ravages of the colonists. So those are some ways that we can look at this document and try to answer some of these questions. I hope this is helpful. I'm always glad to answer more questions. Your uh, assignment here for the Unit 1 discussion will be looking at some earlier documents from the meetings of the Spaniards and the Native Americans. But I hope this gives you a view of how you can look at these different documents or from the past.